Just a few years back, tiny flying robots were supposed to be the future of logistics. The big idea was that they would totally revolutionize the massive warehouses that power, well, everything. But the story of the warehouse drone, it isn't quite that simple. It's really a tale of incredible hype, some pretty harsh realities, and a few surprising twists. So let's get into it. To really get why drones were such a big deal, you first have to understand the stakes. I mean, imagine you're running a warehouse the size of like 20 football fields. What if one single, misplaced pallet of stuff could set off a chain reaction of delays, costing your company millions of dollars? And I'm not talking science fiction here. This is the daily, super high-pressure reality of inventory management.
And for a little while, a very exciting moment, this little guy, the autonomous drone, was seen as the high-tech hero that was going to solve this huge, expensive problem for good.
Okay, so to really get why everyone was so hyped up, let's first wrap our heads around the sheer scale of the challenge these drones were meant to tackle. Let's talk about the warehouse's big problem. So the old school way warehouses do things is called cycle counting. And it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like, people manually counting things. But this isn't just someone walking around with a clipboard. We're talking about workers being lifted dozens of feet into the air on forklift platforms just to scan barcodes on the highest shelves. As you can imagine, it's incredibly slow, it can be pretty dangerous, and of course, simple human error means it's often inaccurate. And it is wildly expensive. Get this number from a Lund University study, 55%. That's the chunk of a warehouse's entire operating cost that comes just from the act of picking items off shelves. That is a huge financial drain, and it just screams for a better, more automated way to do things. All right, so you've got this huge, expensive, dangerous problem, and then enter the hero of our story. Drones. On paper, man, they looked like the absolute perfect solution. The concept was just brilliant. You take these autonomous, self-flying drones, and you pair them with RFID technology. That's just radio frequency identification. The idea was these drones could zip through the aisles, usually at night when no one was around, scanning these little RFID tags on every single box. The goal was to build a perfect, real-time map of the entire inventory, all without getting in the way of a single human worker. It was supposed to be a total game changer. And the first results from the early pilot programs, they were absolutely staggering. A big project run by a company called Verity hit 99.9% inventory accuracy. I mean, come on, that's basically perfect. The speed was just insane. These drones could scan up to 1,000 items per second as they flew by. And the scale? During just a 3-month pilot, the system flew 1,500 flights and read over 80 million RFID tags. Now, with stats like these, you'd think this tech would be in every single warehouse by now, right? But it's not. And that really begs the question, why? Okay, and this is where our story takes a sharp turn. It's time for a reality check, and this one comes straight from an insider, a company that was once a true believer in the drone dream. Now, what's so fascinating about this slide is the story it tells. This is the timeline for a company called Vemon. Early 2022, they pop up with $25 million in funding for their drone solutions. A few months later, they get an investment from Amazon's super prestigious Industrial Innovation Fund. I mean, they are on top of the world. But then, look at this. Just 1 year later, May 2023, they do a complete 180, and they launch what they call a safer, more cost-effective alternative to drones. What on earth happened in that 1 year? This happened. This quote is directly from Vemon, a company that had flown more inventory drone missions than pretty much anyone else in North America. Drones are not the cycle-counting panacea the industry was hoping for. Coming from a former champion of the technology, that is an absolute bombshell. So what exactly did Vemon and other companies discover down on the concrete floors of these warehouses? Let's break down the real-world problems that basically killed all that hype. First up, battery life. The promise was about 20 minutes of flight time for each charge. But in reality, the actual usable mission time was more like 10 or 12 minutes. So why the huge difference? Well, the drone had to save almost half its battery just to make sure it could fly back to its charging station safely. That slashed its useful working time right in half. Then you had the myth of full autonomy. The promise was this system you could just set up and then forget about. The reality? Yeah, not so much. These drones needed constant human babysitting.
Staff had to be there to swap out batteries, make sure the flight paths were clear of junk, and just watch to make sure they didn't crash into anything. It was less autonomous and more remotely supervised. And the list of issues just kept getting longer and longer. The aisles had to be constantly prepped and cleared of stuff like stray shrink wrap, which could get sucked into the rotors and just take a drone down. The cameras had a pretty small field of view, so scan times were way longer than they expected. And the human factor was huge. Warehouse staff said the drones were noisy, distracting, and even dangerous. And yes, crashes, they happened. On top of all that, like any connected device, they were a security risk. They could be hacked.
A research paper from Lund University just hit the nail on the head with this quote from an expert. Don't solve a $100 problem with a $10,000 solution. The tech was incredibly cool, no doubt about it. But for a lot of warehouse operators, the cost and the sheer hassle just didn't add up. Okay, so with all of these problems, the story should probably end right there. Case closed, right? Drones are a dead end. But hold on, because this is where things get really weird. The data tells a completely different story. Just take a look at this market forecast. The warehouse drone market was worth a staggering $3.6 billion in 2024. And it's not shrinking, it's projected to grow to over $6.4 billion by 2029. So, that makes no sense, right? And this brings us to the central puzzle of this whole thing. If these drones have so many fundamental problems, why on earth is the market for them still growing so fast? Well, the answer is that the problem isn't going away. In fact, because of the e-commerce explosion, the need for warehouse automation is bigger than it has ever been. The pressure to manage inventory perfectly and get orders out the door faster is just immense. So while that original idea of a flying drone might have been flawed, companies are still pouring billions into finding a solution. The technology is just evolving. And this is a perfect example of that evolution. Remember Vimon, the company that pivoted away from drones? This is their new solution, StoreTrack. It's not a flying drone, it's a tough computer vision frame loaded with sensors that gets lifted by the forklifts and the machinery that warehouses already have. They kept the smart scanning tech, but they attached it to a more reliable, practical platform. They solved the problem without the problems. So what's the big takeaway here? Are warehouse drones just a failed experiment, a tech dead end? Or were they actually a crucial, necessary, but maybe imperfect first step on the road to a fully automated future? Maybe they weren't the final answer, but they were the stepping stone that got us to whatever is coming next. What do you think?